The story begins with local legends of dust clouds that move against the wind, and the sound of thundering hooves where no horses graze. The air in the high desert is thick with the scent of dry sage and ancient dust that has settled over the red rocks for centuries. You stand at the edge of a vast canyon where the wind hums a low and steady drone that never changes pitch. The ground beneath your feet is a soft carpet of fine sand that cushions every movement. As you look out over the horizon, the sun is a heavy orb of pale orange, sinking slowly into the purple haze of the mountains. There's a rhythm to the stillness that makes your heart beat in slow and measured pulses. You hear the distant echo of a rider, but the sound is soft, like a heartbeat heard through a pillow. It is a monotonous and comforting thrumming that tells of a journey that never ends. The dust clouds rise in pillars of gold and ochre, swirling in slow motion like cream stirred into tea. They move with a grace that defies the laws of nature, drifting silently across the cracked earth. You watch them for hours as they glide past the jagged peaks and the lonely yucca trees. Your eyes feel heavy as you track their slow progress through the valley floor. The sky is transitioning into a deep and velvet indigo that feels cool against your skin. A single star appears in the north, glowing with a steady light that does not flicker or fade. You imagine the riders are made of nothing but moonlight and memory, passing through the physical world without disturbing a single pebble. The sound of the hooves is hypnotic, like the ticking of a grandfather clock in a quiet hallway. It is a sound that has been here before you were born and will remain long after you have drifted off. You feel the tension leaving your jaw and your shoulders as the vastness of the American wilderness expands in your mind. Every mile of open trail is a mile of pure silence and peace. There are no voices here, only the sound of the wind brushing against the weathered stone. The canyons act like giant lungs, breathing in the cool night air and breathing out the warmth of the day. You are walking toward a small cabin made of silvered cedar wood that smells of pine resin and old books. The door is already open, and a single candle burns with a flame so still it looks like a painting. You sit on the porch and watch the phantom riders move across the distant ridge, their shapes blurring into the darkness of the trees. They are guardians of the quiet and keepers of the dream. The sound of the saddles creaking is a gentle, rhythmic noise that syncs with your own breathing, in and out, slow and deep. The world is becoming a soft blur of shadows and silver light. The grass in the meadow sways in unison like a field of wheat underwater. You feel a deep sense of belonging to this empty space where time has no meaning and the only schedule is the rising of the moon. The phantom horses move with a steady gait that never falters and never speeds up. They are a constant in an ever-changing world, providing a backdrop of stability for your mind to rest upon. You lean your head back against the cool wood of the chair and feel the weight of the universe pressing gently against your tired limbs. The riders continued forward in a single file line, each man watching the back of the one before him, while the sound of the wind grew into a constant and white noise that drowned out the clinking of bits and the creak of leather. The cold was a deep and penetrating weight that settled into their bones, making every movement slow and deliberate, like walking through heavy water. For 3 days the storm raged, and for 3 days the world was nothing but the sound of the wind and the feeling of the frost creeping across every surface. When the sun finally broke through the clouds on the 4th morning, it revealed a landscape that was perfectly white and unnaturally still. The search party that left the fort found no tracks and no signs of struggle, but instead they found a circle of 40 horses standing perfectly still in a clearing beneath the shadow of a high ridge. The horses were saddled and bridled, and their coats were thick with rime ice, but the saddles were entirely empty, as if the riders had simply evaporated into the thin and freezing air. There were no footprints leading away from the animals, and no disturbed snow to suggest a flight or a fight. The only sound was the whistling of the breeze through the empty stirrups, creating a hollow and ghostly chime that seemed to ring across the decades. You can imagine the quiet of that scene, where the only movement was the flicking of a horse's ear in the cold sunlight. The mystery of the vanishing cavalry became a story told by flickering campfires, where the sparks drift up into the black sky like tiny orange stars. It is a story that has no resolution and no edges, just a soft and lingering question that floats on the air, like the scent of old cedar. You feel your mind drifting toward that snowy clearing, where everything is silent and the light is a soft and filtered blue. The image of the empty saddles is not frightening, but rather a symbol of a peaceful departure into the mist of the past. You feel the coolness of that winter air on your face, but you are wrapped in a warm and heavy quilt of sleep that protects you from the chill. The rhythm of the horse's breathing in that quiet clearing becomes the rhythm of your own breath, moving in and out in a slow and effortless cycle. The history of the Old West is full of these quiet voids where the details have blurred and the colors have faded into a gentle sepia tone. You are walking through the gallery of these memories, where every footstep is silent and every room is filled with a soft and golden light. The cavalrymen are no longer lost, but are part of the landscape, moving with the wind and the seasons in a perpetual and peaceful patrol. They do not tire and they do not hunger, but simply exist in the spaces between the trees and the shadows of the hills. The mystery is a soft weight on your eyelids, drawing them down further and further into a state of total relaxation. The world outside your window is fading away, just like the tracks in the snow in 1878. There is only the sound of the narrator's voice and the steady. You feel your own breath slowing down to match the steady pace of those ghostly horses as they climb the invisible trails toward the stars. The pale light they carried was like a soft lantern held behind a thick curtain of silk, drawing your eyes and your mind into a state of total stillness. The gear they wore, including the buckles on their saddles and the bits in their horses' mouths, gleamed with a cold and ancient radiance that reminded the miners of the silver they sought deep in the ground. But this was a silver of the spirit and the air. The world of Tombstone, with its dusty streets and rowdy saloons, would fade away into a blur of gray and blue as the riders moved across the horizon. They were a constant and unchanging part of the night, just like the constellations of Orion and the Pleiades that rotated slowly above the desert floor. You are now walking with them in your mind, feeling the weightlessness of the phantom trail and the coolness of the shimmering light that surrounds you. Every step is a movement toward a deeper level of relaxation, where the muscles of your body feel like they are melting into the soft earth. The shimmer of the spurs is the last thing you see before you close your eyes, and it remains behind your eyelids as a soft and comforting glow that guides you into the darkness. The horses are moving slower now, almost at a standstill as they reach the highest peak and merge with the Milky Way itself. The story of the riders is a long and winding path that leads directly to the center of your rest, where there are no worries and no noises, only the eternal and shimmering quiet of the Old West. The pale light is now a blanket that covers you from head to toe, providing a sense of safety and warmth that is impossible to break. You are sinking deeper and deeper into the velvet folds of the night, while the phantom riders continue their silent and glowing patrol across the edges of your dreams. The silver and the light and the silence are all one thing now, and that thing is sleep. You are drifting on a sea of pale moonlight, where the waves are made of silk and the wind is a whisper of peace. The miners have all gone to bed, and the candles have all been blown out, leaving only the glow of the riders to watch over the sleeping world. You are part of that quiet world now, and you are ready to let the shimmer take you away into the long and restorative dark of the night. A terrified stagecoach driver once sat by a dim lantern and recounted the story of a high-speed chase through a narrow mountain pass where the air was thick with the smell of rain and the heavy scent of wet pine needles. The wheels of the heavy coach were churning through the deep and dark mud of the winding trail, creating a rhythmic splashing sound that echoed against the granite walls of the canyon. It was a dark and stormy night in the late autumn when the clouds hung low and the moon was nothing but a faint silver smudge behind a curtain of gray mist. The driver gripped the leather reins with white knuckles as he felt the presence of something moving in the darkness just behind the rear wheels. He looked back and saw the shadows of
The mud of the world has no hold on you as you drift into a state of weightless grace, much like the riders who left no mark on the ground. The rhythm of the journey is the only thing that remains, and it is a rhythm of safety and quietude and eternal rest. The mountain pass has opened up into a wide and starlit plain where the air is still and the night is kind. You are sinking into the cushions of the seat and letting the reins fall from your hands because the horses know the way home to the land of dreams. Everything is still and everything is right, and the chase is finally over. Exploring the auditory phenomenon of the phantom riders begins in the deep silence of the canyon floor, where the air is so still that you can hear the faint hum of the earth beneath your feet. As the evening sky turns to a dusty violet, the first sound begins to drift through the sagebrush like a distant memory of metal on metal. It is the rhythmic jingle of bits and the soft clinking of silver chains moving in perfect time with an invisible stride. The sound is repetitive and steady, like a soft rain tapping on a tin roof or the steady drip of water in a limestone cave. You find yourself leaning against a weathered cedar post, feeling the cool texture of the wood as you listen to the cadence of a long-forgotten cavalry charge that never seems to arrive but never truly leaves. The noise is not loud or jarring, but rather a hypnotic and melodic vibration that settles into the background of your mind. It is joined by the phantom shouts of men whose voices have been thinned by a century of wind and sun until they sound like nothing more than the sighing of the pines. These shouts are not aggressive, but are instead a rhythmic chanting of orders that have lost their urgency and turned into a lullaby of history. You close your eyes and track the sound as it moves from the north ridge to the dry creek bed in a slow and predictable arc. The jingling of the bridles is a metallic shimmer in the air that feels like a physical weight pressing gently on your eyelids. Every clink of the steel and every creak of the invisible leather saddles adds another layer of comfort to the night. The sound of the hooves is a muffled thud against the soft sand, creating a low-frequency pulse that resonates in your chest and tells your heart to slow its pace. The auditory mystery of the Old West is a tapestry of these small and delicate noises woven into a blanket of absolute peace. You imagine the riders passing just a few feet away, their presence marked only by the shifting of the air and the steady metallic rhythm that serves as a metaphor for the passage of time. The shouts are now just echoes of echoes, becoming softer with every repetition until they are indistinguishable from the rustle of dry grass. There is a profound sense of safety in this soundscape because it is a cycle that has repeated for generations without change or interruption. The consistency of the phantom noise provides a predictable path for your thoughts to follow as they drift away from the waking world. The bits jingle once more in a slow and descending scale that signals the riders are moving deeper into the shadows of the mesas. The sound is like a soft bell tolling for the end of the day and the beginning of a long and restorative rest. You feel the tension in your neck and back dissolving into the ground as the phantom charge moves further and The light of the moon is so bright that it turns the surrounding rocks into statues of silver and the sand into a sea of frosted glass. You feel a sense of heavy relaxation spreading through your limbs as you track the slow and deliberate pace of the patrol. The formation is a symbol of stability and endurance that reassures the mind and allows the body to sink into the ground. The riders are not ghosts of war, but ghosts of a quiet and eternal duty moving through the sky like a clockwork mechanism that has been winding down for 100 years. The moon begins its own slow climb higher into the sky, and as it moves, the silhouettes transition from the golden face of the lunar disk into the deep velvet blue of the upper atmosphere. They become even more ethereal as they blend into the stars, appearing as a faint ripple in the fabric of the night. You breathe in the cool and scentless air of the midnight hour, feeling the weight of the universe pressing gently against your chest in a rhythmic and comforting way. The perfect alignment of the horses and the men is a lullaby for the eyes, drawing you deeper into a state of trance where the only thing that matters is the next step and the next shadow. The desert floor is now a map of shadows and light, where every bush and every stone has its own silent twin cast by the moonlight. You are part of this silent world where the only movement is the slow rotation of the celestial bodies and the steady march of the phantom guard. The formation is a chain of peace that binds the earth to the sky and your mind to the quietude of sleep. You feel the muscles in your face softening and your jaw relaxing as the visual repetition of the riders works its magic on your senses. The moon is now a pale and distant orb, but its light remains as a soft glow that permeates everything, including your own thoughts. The silhouettes are fading now as they reach the end of the ridge and descend into the hidden valleys of the mind, where the light is always soft and the dreams are always deep. The spectacle is over, but the feeling of order and tranquility remains behind, like the warmth of a fire after the flames have gone out. You are drifting on a sea of silver and blue, where the only direction is down into the darkness of rest. The riders have completed their circuit, and the formation has dissolved into the mist of the stars, leaving you alone with the perfect and heavy silence of the desert moon. You are safe, and you are still, and you are ready to let the last of the light fade away as you enter the long and restorative tunnel of sleep. A dive into the why of the Phantom Riders leads you deep into the heart of local folklore, where the elders speak in low and rhythmic tones about a time when the land and the people were bound by promises that were as solid as the red granite of the canyon walls. The stories suggest that these riders are not merely wandering spirits, but are guardians bound to the dusty earth until a lost relic or a broken promise is finally restored to its rightful place in history. You can imagine the weight of such.
You are now a part of the Book of the West, resting between the pages of a story that has no beginning and no end. The riders continue their slow march across the ridge, their outlines blurring into the indigo sky as they wait for the relic to be found or the promise to be honored by the turning of the earth. The rhythm of their horses is the ticking of a cosmic clock that tells you it is time to rest and time to dream. The why of their existence is a soft and fading whisper that eventually turns into a deep and resonant silence. You are floating in that silence now, feeling the pulse of the ancient land and the steady heartbeat of the folklore that keeps the world turning while you sleep. Every breath you take is a step closer to the center of the mystery, where the answers are made of moonlight and soft shadows. You are perfectly relaxed and perfectly still as the legend of the Phantom Riders wraps around you like a heavy wool coat. The promise of sleep is the only promise that needs to be kept tonight, and you are keeping it with every slow and steady breath. The desert is quiet, and the riders are patient, and you are now drifting away into the long and peaceful dark, where the stories are over and the rest has begun. A first-hand account of a lone gold prospector begins on a quiet evening in a secluded gulch where the walls of the canyon are painted in hues of deep violet and burnt sienna. The old man had spent his day panning in the cool mountain stream, feeling the rhythmic swirl of water against the metal and the steady weight of the stones in his hand. As the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, he built a small and humble campfire using dry cedar branches that crackled with a soft and predictable snap. The smoke rose in a straight and slender pillar of blue toward the emerging stars, and the air grew crisp with the arrival of the high desert night. As he sat on a smoothed log, warming his calloused hands, he noticed a figure appearing from the shadows of the tall pines, moving with a grace that was as silent as the falling dew. It was a soldier, dressed in a tattered Union blue coat that seemed to be woven from the evening mist in the silver light of the rising moon. The soldier was transparent enough that the prospector could see the faint outlines of the sagebrush through his coat, but he moved with a solid and dignified presence that commanded a deep and heavy respect. Without a word, the phantom soldier sat down on the opposite side of the fire, stretching out his long and spectral legs toward the warmth of the flickering flames. The prospector felt no fear, only a profound sense of companionship and a stillness that settled over his soul like a thick wool blanket. The firelight danced across the soldier's face, revealing eyes that were calm and filled with the quietude of 1,000 years of wandering. They sat together in a silence that was more comforting than any conversation, a silence that was measured by the rhythmic pulse of the crickets and the occasional soft hoot of an owl in the distance. The soldier occasionally reached out a translucent hand to adjust a log that wasn't there, but the gesture was so familiar and human that it made the prospector feel entirely at home in the vastness of the wilderness. You can imagine the two of them sitting there as the embers turned from bright orange to a dull and sleepy red, casting a soft glow on the dusty ground between them. The world beyond the circle of light ceased to exist, leaving only the warmth of the fire and the steady presence. They spoke in long and monotonous sentences about atmospheric refraction and temperature inversions, and the way that layers of hot air near the desert floor could bend the rays of the sun to create images of things that were not truly there. They called the phantom riders a mere optical illusion, a collection of heat hazes and light play reflecting off the mineral-rich mountainsides and the vast salt flats that stretched toward the horizon. They spent their days recording the humidity and the barometric pressure in a repetitive and rhythmic scratching of fountain pens against thick paper, while the locals watched them with a quiet and knowing patience. The townspeople who lived among the saguaro and the scrub brush knew the difference between the shimmering waver of a desert mirage and the steady, purposeful movement of the spectral cavalry. They knew that a heat haze does not carry the faint scent of old leather or the rhythmic jingle of spurs that rings out only when the wind dies down to a complete and heavy silence. The locals sat on their wooden benches, feeling the grain of the timber beneath their hands, and they watched the scientists struggle to explain why a mirage would appear in the middle of a moonlit night when the sun had long since vanished and the earth had grown cold and still. There was a steady and hypnotic tension between the two groups, a slow movement of ideas that felt like the rotation of a windmill in a light breeze. The scientists would point to the horizon, where the air seemed to liquidize and flow like water, claiming it was a fata morgana, while the old ranchers would simply point to the fresh horseshoes found on a high ridge where no living horse had traveled in years. You can imagine the quiet debates held in the lamplight, where the voices were low and droning, creating a hum that could put a restless mind to ease. The repetition of the scientific terms became its own kind of lullaby, a series of syllables like convection and reflection and light waves that blurred together into a soothing stream of sound. The locals did not try to argue, but instead offered stories that were as heavy and grounding as the stones in the canyon floor. They spoke of the way the phantom riders would stop and stare at a traveler with eyes that held the weight of a century, and how no trick of the light could replicate the feeling of a sudden and profound chill in the middle of a summer night. As the scientists looked through their lenses, they saw only the distortion of the atmosphere, but the locals looked with their hearts and saw the history of the land, walking in a line of perfect military formation. The world of the frontier was a place where the lines between the known and the unknown were as thin as a single strand of spider silk blowing in the wind. Your mind begins to drift between these two perspectives, finding a comfortable middle ground where you don't have to decide what is real and what is a dream. The idea of a mirage is a soft and shimmering thought that allows your focus to soften and your eyelids to grow heavy with the weight of the desert twilight. The long and technical explanations of the men from the east become a distant and muffled murmur, like the sound of a river flowing over smooth pebbles in the dark. You feel the bed beneath you as a solid and unmoving fact, while your imagination floats toward the horizon, where the light is bending and twisting into shapes of horses and men. The debate is a slow and circular thing that has no winner and no end, which makes it the perfect soundtrack for a deep and restorative sleep.
The words on the page spoke of a meeting that never happened and a message of peace that was never delivered to the outpost on the other side of the pass. It seemed that the discovery of this message was the trigger that the land had been waiting for, because as the last word was read, the atmosphere began to shift and grow dense with the presence of the past. The light in the canyon took on a golden and liquid quality that smoothed over the sharp edges of the rocks and turned the shadows into deep pools of indigo velvet. You can feel the weight of your own thoughts becoming lighter as the mystery of the letter unfolds in a slow and monotonous progression of syllables. The riders began to appear, not as sudden specters, but as a gradual thickening of the air along the ridgeline, moving in a slow and rhythmic parade that honored the delivery of the words. The horsemen were no longer frantic or chasing the wind, but were now moving with a steady and peaceful gait that indicated a task finally nearing its completion. The letter was a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the memory, and as you hold the image of that weathered parchment in your mind, you feel your own body becoming heavy and still. The sound of the wind through the brush matches the sound of your breathing in and out in a cycle that has no end and no beginning. The sightings were not a haunting, but a mechanical response of the universe to a story that needed to be heard. And now that the message was found, the riders could begin their final and most quiet descent. The leather pouch was placed back on the ground, and the desert seemed to sigh with a profound sense of relief that radiated upward through the soles of your feet and into your soul. You are now part of the landscape where the past and the present have merged into a single and singular point of absolute rest. The desert brush sways in a rhythmic and hypnotic wave that lulls your eyes into a state of semi-consciousness, where the only reality is the coolness of the approaching night. The riders are fading into the stars, their forms becoming thinner and more transparent until they are nothing but the memory of a light. The letter is once again safe in the silence of the earth, and the duty of the phantom cavalry is satisfied by the simple act of being remembered. You are sinking deeper into the velvet darkness of the valley, where the air is perfectly calm, and the only movement is the slow heartbeat of the mountain. The story of the letter is a soft and repetitive loop that circles your mind and clears away the clutter of the day until there is only the vast and beautiful expanse of a dreamless void. You are safe, and you are warm, and you are completely relaxed as the mystery of the century-old message dissolves into the peaceful and restorative dark of the night. The stars are watching over the leather pouch and the brush and the silent riders and you as you drift further away from the shore of wakefulness. The end of the story is not a conclusion, but a transition into a deep and timeless sleep where the only thing that remains is the feeling of absolute peace. Stories of how the phantom riders supposedly guided lost travelers to safety begin in the high mountain passes where the air grows thin and the clouds descend like heavy wet blankets of gray wool. Travelers often tell of moments when the trail vanished beneath a sudden and treacherous storm that turned the world into a
The world is a place of order and care, where the ghosts are kind and the path is always clear. You are sinking into a soft and protective layer of sleep, where the only sound is the rhythmic breathing of the earth, and the only light is the faint shimmer of a distant star. The story of the guides is a lullaby that wraps around you like a heavy cloak of silk and wool, keeping you safe and still until the morning light. The phantom riders have reached the end of their patrol, and they are now standing at the edge of your dreams, waiting to guide you into the final and most peaceful transition of the night. You are completely relaxed and completely still, and you are ready to let go of the trail and fall into the deep and welcoming dark. How the riders dissolve into the morning mist begins at that delicate and liminal hour when the deep indigo of the midnight sky starts to soften into a pale and dusty lavender along the eastern edge of the world. The desert is at its coldest and most quiet during this time, as the creatures of the night have retreated to their burrows, and the birds of the day have yet to find their voices in the stillness. You can imagine the phantom riders finishing their long and rhythmic circuit of the canyon floor, their horses moving with a slow and heavy gait that suggests the weight of 1,000 years of history. They do not hurry or change their pace as the light begins to shift, because they are as constant as the granite walls that surround them. As the first rays of sunlight begin to crest the high ridges, they appear as thin ribbons of molten gold and pale honey, stretching across the sky and touching the very tips of the red rock spires. The moment the warmth of the sun reaches the cold shadows of the valley, a thick and milky mist begins to rise from the dry creek beds and the pockets of sagebrush, creating a soft and opaque layer of air that hugs the ground. The riders move into this mist with a grace that is both beautiful and monotonous, their forms beginning to lose their sharp edges and blurring into the white vapor like ink spreading slowly through a glass of clear water. As the sunlight descends the canyon walls inch by inch, the translucent blue of the riders' coats begins to shimmer and fade until they are indistinguishable from the swirling fog. There is no sound to this disappearance, only the steady and rhythmic pulse of the morning air as it begins to warm and expand. You watch as a silver spur or a brass buckle catches a stray beam of light and gives one final and softest glint before it vanishes entirely into the atmosphere. The horses' manes blend with the rising steam of the desert floor, and their hooves, which left no tracks in the dust, now leave no shadow in the light. It is a process of total and peaceful dissolution, where the spirits of the past return to the elements of the air and the stone to wait for the next rising of the moon. You feel a sense of heavy completion as you witness this daily ritual of letting go and fading away into the vastness of the morning. The canyon walls are now glowing with a warm and radiant orange that feels like a physical embrace against the coolness of the night. The mist is a soft and protective blanket that hides the riders from the waking world, allowing them to rest in the spaces between the atoms of the desert air. Your own mind is mirroring this transition as the thoughts of the day begin to dissolve into the soft and white fog of a deep and restorative sleep. There is nothing left to see and nothing left to track as the horizon becomes a wash of bright and hopeful color that signals the end of the patrol. You can imagine the steady pulse of the gallop working its way into your own heartbeat and slowing it down to a measured and peaceful pace that prepares you for the journey into sleep. The contemporary world with its buzzing lights and rushing engines fades into a distant and irrelevant blur as you focus on the timeless and steady rhythm of the riders who never tire and never cease their patrol. The ranchers say that the air becomes noticeably cooler as the sound passes by, as if the riders are carrying the chill of 1878 with them through the decades to remind us of the beauty of the cold and the dark. You feel that coolness now as a refreshing touch against your forehead and your eyes, helping to soothe away the lingering thoughts of the busy day. The sound of the gallop is a lullaby for the modern age, providing a connection to a simpler and more rhythmic time when the only clock was the sun and the only map was the stars. Every hoofbeat is a step further away from the noise of the present and a step deeper into the silence of the past, where the shadows are long and the peace is absolute. The hikers often find themselves falling into a trance as they listen to the phantom horses move toward the horizon, where the dark blue of the night meets the charcoal black of the mountains. It is a sound that requires nothing from you except your attention and your willingness to let go of the shore of reality. As the gallop recedes into the distance, it leaves behind a silence that is even more profound than the one that preceded it. A silence that feels like it has been scrubbed clean by the passing of the spectral guard. You are sinking into that silence now, feeling the bed beneath you as a supportive and unmoving platform that floats on the surface of the desert night. The stories of the ranchers and the hikers are like soft whispers shared across a campfire that has long since turned to ash, leaving only the warmth of the memory to keep you company. You are safe and you are still, and you are completely surrounded by the protective echo of the eternal patrol, which continues its watch over the land, even as you close your eyes and drift into the deep and dark valley of a dreamless rest. The rhythm of the phantom gallop is the final sound that your mind holds on to before it dissolves into the bliss of the restorative night. The mystery of physical evidence begins in the high altitudes of the Sierra Nevada and the desolate stretches of the northern plains, where hunters and trackers often find themselves staring at the ground in a state of quiet and heavy wonder. They speak of finding rusty 19th century horseshoes resting gently on top of a layer of perfectly fresh and powdery snow that fell only hours before dawn. The iron is always pitted with the slow oxidation of 100 years, and the shape of the shoe is narrow and elegant, like those once forged in the cavalry stables of the 1870s. What makes the discovery so hypnotic and stilling to the mind is that there is no path leading to the shoe and no tracks leading away from it in any direction. It sits there as if it had simply materialized. You are ready to let go of the iron and the snow and the light as you enter the final and most quiet stage of the night. A concluding reflection on the American West's enduring spirit begins with the realization that the line between history and myth is as thin and blurred as the silhouette of a lone rider disappearing into a distant cloud of golden dust. The vast landscape stretches out before you in a series of repetitive and rolling hills that seem to have no beginning and no end. The air is thick with the weight of 1,000 stories that have soaked into the red earth and the weathered stones over countless generations. You can feel the rhythmic pulse of the land as it breathes in the cool night air and exhales the lingering warmth of the afternoon sun. This is a place where the past does not sit behind a glass case, but walks freely among the shadows of the mesas and the whispers of the tall grass. The enduring spirit of the West is a steady and monotonous force, like the flow of a deep river moving through a canyon of ancient marble. As you lie still, you can imagine the phantom riders as part of the natural geography, just like the jagged peaks and the winding dry washes that define the horizon. The blurring of reality and legend is not a source of confusion, but a source of profound and heavy comfort, because it suggests that nothing is ever truly lost to time. Every hoofbeat that echoes in the silence of a windless night is a reminder that the courage and the mystery of the frontier continue to patrol the borders of our dreams. The image of the rider in the dust is a visual lullaby that softens the edges of your mind and allows your thoughts to drift like smoke from a dying campfire. The dust itself is made of the pulverized history of the plains, carrying the essence of the pioneers and the soldiers and the dreamers who once looked at the same stars you see now. The stars do not change, and the desert does not forget, and the spirit of the West remains as a constant and unwavering presence